Stop that cart and crack the crate, Evorast said, stepping in front of the shipment as it rattled through the pediatric intake doors. His voice cut sharp, not loud, but enough to still the porter's hands. Scan those bars again. He needs protein, not candy. The nurse froze mid-motion. Dr. Oliver Hahn approached from the ward, expression narrowing as the heads-up display over the crate scrolled cheerful calorie counts that meant nothing to a boy's bones. On the bed, the child stared blankly at the ceiling tiles, lips cracked, cheeks hollow. His father gripped the rail so tightly the veins stood out. Monitors clicked their mechanical rhythm, plastic gowns rustled, antiseptic lingered over the sour bite of old coffee. Evo slid a wrapper with his pocket knife, broke a square in half, pressed crumbs to his tongue, and spat into a tissue. Sweetener and oil, no backbone. This will keep grown men walking and let boys collapse, Evo said, brushing crumbs into a tray. The father jolted as if struck. Who does that? He whispered, trying to keep his voice steady, breath shaky with fear. Someone who wants panic to grow quietly, Evo replied. He pinched the boy's thin arm. The skin folded and stayed too long. He turned to the nurse. Flag every pediatric chart for lysine testing. Cross-check by lot number. Any pallet like this goes to adult wards only. When logistics protest, send them to me. Hahn already keyed orders into his slate, jaw tight. A porter rolled the cart toward the lab, wheels squeaking. The boy's father lowered himself to a stool, staring at the pattern of floor tiles as if the shapes might hold an answer. The corridor outside carried radiator heat mixed with bleach. Downstairs, the cafeteria line twisted around dented warmers. Men traded wristwatches for meal tickets under buzzing lights. Steam clung to the air, thick with reheated stew. Evo paused by the stairwell window and pulled up his tablet, stitching reports from Warsaw, Accra, Lahore, Memphis, and Narva. Each one showed the same curve. Boys shrinking faster than adults maintained. He shaded the neighborhood's worst hit. Jorn Slate's voice rasped through his earpiece from a customs office across town. Evo, occupation's got a new choke point. Sanitation hold. They're freezing protein shipments at orbit for 3 days minimum. Some don't come down at all. That delay turns fresh shipments into trash, Ivo said, dragging supply lines over the map. As he layered distribution routes against clinic logs, the picture formed, shortages falling with deliberate symmetry. Not random, not clumsy, designed. Send me the ordinance behind the hold-on, he added. Joran coughed. Signed by Logistics Prefect Reth March. Claims contamination risk below stratosphere. Reads like ration control. Evo rode the elevator to the roof. Cold bit his face as sleet cut sideways across the skyline. Sirens slid down avenues, fading into distance. On a tower, opposite, a laser plasma display blinked through stacked advisories until the feed looked like a fever chart. He keyed an encrypted link. Admiral Cole, request audit authority for orbital pallets. I want direct samples pulled to ground. Granted, Bram Cole answered. His tone carried fatigue like gravel underfoot. Teams are standing by. You'll run point? I'll take Hahn and whoever can stay upright 12-hour, Evo said. Make it happen. We're losing ground fast. Back in the ward, Evo crouched beside the father. He placed a sealed bottle on the table. Give him sips. Not a cure, but it will bridge the worst. The man nodded once, eyes bright but steady. What's happening to us? He asked. Evo kept his reply level. Someone's learned how to break cities without firing shots. They'll be stopped, but first we need to prove the method. In pathology, counters gleamed under harsh light. Air carried the sour bite of cultures alongside burnt coffee. Hahn lined samples on trays while Miro, a technician with stained hands, fetched reagents from cracked cabinets. You think they planned this deficit? Hahn said. Evo didn't look up. Targeting growth avoids headlines. It buys quiet submission. Panic grows slow when children waste before men collapse. They ran assays. Numbers scrolled upward, empty of the proteins that should have been there. Evo rubbed his eyes, forcing the chain of evidence into focus. Clinic trends, shipment profiles, orbital holds. He bit into a scrap of bread from a vending machine. It tasted like paste and salt. The memory of his own childhood appetite, slamming bowls of noodles after practice, rose unwanted and left his throat tight. By dusk, the operations room walls carried a map layered with string and markers. Each line traced from rail depots to clinics, weighted with figures showing losses. Red threads converged on orbit. He wrote in sharp script beside them, delays, spoilage, mislabels, diversions. All intentional. Thomas Vetch broke in over comms, wind hammering his words. Evo, 3 alien cutters shifting course toward the tender. They're hauling drill sleds. If they reach the nodule fields, quotas mean nothing. Evo froze. Ruthenide. R43. Catalyst for their fermenters. The thought landed heavy. Disable them without destroying. I need rigs intact, he said. You'll get wreckage either way, Thomas warned. Bring what you can. Evo killed the line and turned back to Han. We need comparative assays. Bars routed to child wards versus industrial sites. If the profiles differ, we have proof samples won't lie, Han said. But motive? Leverage, Evo answered. Choke the children, keep riots slow, push leaders toward compliance while stripping our seafloor. He called Joran again. Pull every tender linked to ruthenide refining over 6 months. Track buyers, shipments, docks. You think they can't run their food? Plants without it? Joran asked. They can't scale without it, Evo said. If they're betting our fear lasts longer than their pantry, we're living on a clock. Night pressed against the windows. Rain froze against the glass. The ward settled into a rhythm of footsteps, murmured encouragements, quiet alarms. Evo walked the rows. A boy in a knitted cap slept open-mouthed, breath sweet with syrup from the bottle. His father sat upright, eyes fixed forward, posture rigid like a sentinel. Anger pressed into Evo's chest, sharp and cold. He let it harden into work. Coat drawn close, pockets heavy with sample bags, he stepped into the night air where concrete shone with ice, and unseen authorities counted rations like leash length. He meant to tug until something broke. Cut power to the lower decks, the Cathari logistics officer ordered in clipped tones, his command echoing down the corridor of the orbital hub. The chamber lights dimmed, leaving strips of pale blue guiding crews toward their stations. Rethmar stood tall in the control bay, claws tapping against the console surface as streams of numbers scrolled across a vertical heads-up display. The figures pleased him, human pediatric wards deteriorating on schedule, unrest simmering but not yet boiling. He leaned forward, voice dry as sand. Their leaders will not gamble stability if their children weaken first. Pressure applied in silence makes nations compliant. His adjutant shifted uneasily, secondary eyelids tightening over eyes that scanned graphs of calorie intake, lysine depletion, and projected collapse curves. We've calculated their panic thresholds, but the pattern carries risk. They will notice the demographic targeting. They already notice, Rethmar replied, flexing the spines on his back. What they cannot change is our hold above their skies. Their outrage is noise. Hunger cuts sharper than anger. He gestured at a smaller screen where Earth's clinics flashed in red intervals. They will trade resources before they revolt, and we require 43 catalysts for our fermenters. Until their seafloor nodules are fully secured, we prolong their paralysis. Far below, Earth's night glowed with clusters of city lights beneath drifting storm fronts. From the orbital hub's viewport, the planet looked steady, as though the faint gleam of rivers and roads promised continuity. Yet on the ground, supply trucks groaned across frozen bridges, while children fainted during school assemblies. Fathers carried ration cards like condemned men carried final letters. In a staff room under Warsaw's old metro system, Ivo Rask laid a paper map over the table, weighted with an empty glass. Around him, Haan, Joran Slate, and Neil Oric gathered close. Damp concrete walls wept condensation. The scent of mildew and rust clung to their coats. Ivo marked points with a pen. Every delay lines up with Rethmar's approvals. It's not contamination, it's distribution sabotage. They know what they're doing. Niall leaned back, jaw tight. So what's our lever? We can complain, file protests, write condemnations. None of it feeds anyone, unless we hit them where it hurts. His tone was bitter, but beneath it burned a hunger for direction. Ivo rubbed his temples. We do have a lever. R43. Without it, their fermenters collapse. They can't substitute quickly. Alternatives destabilize under pressure. That is our entry point. Han frowned. Weaponizing food supply brings blowback. You risk being seen as executioners, not defenders. They started it, Joran growled, slamming his palm on the table. The sound echoed in the low-ceilinged chamber. They chose children as targets. What law shields them now? If we sit idle, we lose generations. Evo's hand flattened against the map. Steady. We aren't poisoning fields. We're calibrating a deterrent. A variant of R43 that functions for us, fails for them. It forces negotiation without wiping them out. We must hold the moral high ground even while striking. The lamps flickered as another blackout rippled across the district. Outside, a generator sputtered to life, coughing smoke into the damp tunnels. Shouts echoed faintly from above. Families arguing over remaining food tickets. Neil glanced at Evo. If we move forward, Hearthfire becomes our backbone. Fermenters in every tunnel we can wire. But they'll come after us fast. Once they realize we can fight starvation with science, they'll sabotage harder. They already will, Evo said quietly. We need redundancy. Vaults seeded with strains. Rotation libraries. No single point of failure. On the orbital hub, Rethmar observed the planet through a transparent panel, claws folded neatly behind his back. His adjutant interrupted. Reports indicate human submarines patrolling the Pacific fields. They've intercepted 2 cutters. Rethmar narrowed his gaze. Expected. Their desperation breeds small victories, but without catalysts, they will feed only scraps. Let them bleed resources defending the seabed. We can outlast them, unless they corrupt the catalyst, the adjutant murmured. They won't, Rethmar said with flat certainty. Their ethic forbids it. They cling to notions of fairness. That makes them predictable. Back on Earth, Tomas Vesh's voice came through the comm unit in Evo's pocket. Static crackled as he spoke from the deck of a submarine. We held 1 rig, lost 2 cutters. Casualties on both sides. The rigs were packed with mining drones, ready to tear into nodules. They aren't probing, they're committed. Evo's pulse hammered in his ears. Secure whatever samples you can. Even wreckage helps us. Don't destroy the rigs if capture is possible. Understood, Tomas replied grimly. We're dragging 1 back. It'll fight us every meter. The war had shifted. Not open battles, not fire. Raining from orbit, but suffocation through calculated shortages and raids beneath the sea. Evo pressed his knuckles to the table, eyes tracing the lines he'd drawn earlier. Hunger had become arithmetic, and arithmetic could be turned against its makers. He gathered his team. From this moment, we move beyond defense. Han, keep a size running on every shipment. Joran, trace Mars network. Niall, prepare fermenter schematics for deployment. Thomas will hold the seafloor. If we fail, boys keep wasting while our leaders beg. If we succeed, their commanders face a starvation clock of their own. For a long moment, the chamber carried only the drip of water from cracked pipes. Then Neil nodded slowly, fire hardening in his eyes. Then let's build something they cannot outlast. Above Rethmar keyed a sequence on the heads-up display. Graphs shimmered, showing Earth's declining health curves. His claws tapped once more against the console. They will yield, he said to himself. Yet a flicker of doubt rippled in his second heart as reports of resistance threaded through the feed. Hunger was a weapon, but weapons sometimes broke in the wielder's hands. Open the valve, or we're wasting another night, Niall Oric barked, voice strained above the hiss of steam filling the chamber. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, arms slick with sweat despite the winter chill bleeding through cracked tiles above. The fermenter tank trembled as pressure climbed, gauges twitching under dim light. Around him, technicians in stained overalls rushed to clamp lines and seal ports, while a sour stench of rotting starch rose from the slurry inside. Evo Rask stepped through the doorway, pulling the collar of his coat tighter against the damp. Heat slapped his face, mixed with the copper bite of rusting pipes. He scanned the operation with a hard eye. Steel barrels lined across the tunnel, improvised piping lashed with wire, coolant dripping into buckets. The tunnel had once carried trains. Now it carried a gamble that could decide whether children ate or faded. Status? Evo asked. Batch collapsed again, Niall snapped, tossing a rag onto a bench. Strain won't stabilize under load. Contamination everywhere. We can't keep shoving spoiled feed down their throats and calling it progress. His voice cracked with anger, not hopelessness. The words carried by exhaustion layered over fury. Miro, a young technician with hands blistered raw from chemical burns, raised his head. Sir, we did manage 3 liters before the crash. Protein density low, but usable Evo moved closer, bent over the sample jar. He dipped a finger and touched it to his tongue. Bitter, grainy with a faint sour bite that caught his throat. He swallowed anyway. It's food, he said quietly, wiping his mouth. Not enough, but better than nothing. Niall slammed a fist onto the bench, rattling tools. Better than nothing won't stop the wards from filling. They are dying while we tinker. Every hour wasted puts another grave in the ground. Evo straightened, eyes fixed on the trembling tank. You think I don't know? I walked past 3 coffins this morning. They were smaller than the cart carrying them. Don't talk to me about time, Niall. Talk to me about solutions. The tunnel fell silent except for the hiss of leaking pipes and the drip-drip into buckets. Outside, generators rattled, sending faint vibrations through the floor. Niall exhaled sharply, jaw clenched. We rotate strains faster. Vaults across districts. Diversify before they sabotage again. Hearthfire has to survive collapse, or it's worthless. Evo nodded once. Then we seed every tunnel. Even if one fails, others stand above ground. Jorn Slate moved through the crowded market streets, coat collar pulled high against biting wind. Vendors called out prices, offering wilted greens and scavenged cans. He watched fathers bargain with pocket watches, mothers withered with worry, clasping empty bags. A child cried at a stall stacked with flour sacks too expensive for his family to touch. Jorn's earpiece buzzed. Slate, confirmed transport reroutes, Cole's voice came through, curt and graveled. Confirmed, Jorn answered. He ducked into an alley where exhaust smoke stung his throat. But Cole, the diversion cuts half the grid from rural lines. They're already rioting out there. They riot or they starve, Cole replied. You make the call. The line clicked dead. Back in the tunnel, alarms shrieked as pressure spiked on the fermenter. Miro scrambled to shut valves, boots slipping on wet concrete. Steam blasted from a cracked gasket, filling the air with a scalding mist that made eyes sting and throats raw. Neil grabbed a wrench, twisted until his knuckles tore. The noise drowned thought, then subsided with a final hiss. The gauge needle swung back into range. Miro coughed, wiping his face with his sleeve. Tank's holding. For now. Evo stepped forward, voice steady despite the chaos. Next batch, we run with the decoy strain in parallel. If the spore sabotage hits, it kills the shield. Not the main line. Neil's eyes flicked to him, surprise breaking through fatigue. That might work. It buys us resilience. Don't say that word, Evo muttered under his breath, then raised his voice. It buys us time. They spent the night seeding fresh barrels, hands blistered, eyes red from strain. Each man knew the risk: contamination, sabotage, or worse, raids from occupation patrols sweeping tunnels for forbidden projects. Yet work continued, tools clanging, valves twisting, sweat dripping into collars. Hunger drove them harder than fear. Hours later, Evo climbed the narrow stairwell and emerged into the city's frozen dawn. Frost coated the railings, his breath rising in plumes. Bells from a nearby church tower told the hour, mournful and heavy. He looked out. Across the skyline, chimneys coughing smoke, queues forming at ration depots, trucks rumbling down streets flanked by soldiers. The weight of the task pressed down, but so did the memory of that boy in the ward. Lips cracked, eyes empty. Behind him, Niall emerged, hair damp, hands grimy. He stood beside Evo in silence for a moment, then spoke softly. We're building fires underground, but the cold above is stronger. How long do you think before they strike harder? As soon as they believe we can outlast them, Evo answered, watching the convoy crawl below. And when they do, we'll be ready. The clang of distant rails echoed, carrying faint vibrations up through the concrete. Evo tucked his hands into his coat, turned back toward the stairwell, and descended into the heat and fumes of the fermenter tunnels once more. carrying with him the certainty that every drop of bitter slurry was a weapon sharper than steel. Rig contact confirmed. They're drilling already, Tomas Vet shouted over the comm, voice distorted by static and pressure interference. His submarine jolted as ballast tanks adjusted, the metal skin groaning against the weight of the ocean above. Crewmen strapped into their harnesses while lamps bathed the control cabin in pale green glow. Every man's face glistened with sweat despite the cold seeping through the hull. On the forward heads-up display, the outline of alien cutters shimmered in sonar shades, sleek silhouettes shaped like spears. Between them, mining rigs descended with spindly arms extended, clawing for Earth's nodules. The seabed shuddered as claws tore sediment, stirring clouds that rolled upward like underwater storms. Tomas leaned into the microphone. All units, nets armed, cable torpedoes on my mark. He glanced at his first officer, Karst, who gripped the firing controls with pale knuckles. We bring them back alive if we can. Rigs are worth more intact than sunk from the opposite flank. Another human sub lurked in shadows of basalt ridges. Its commander reported, 2 escorts closing. Drones releasing from bays. The sonar pinged again, sharper this time. Alien machines fanning out like hunters. Tomas steadied his breathing. We hit hard, fast. Drag them down before they scatter. He raised his hand. Fire! The cabin vibrated as torpedoes shot forward, steel cables spooling out behind them. Explosions muffled by water thumped through the hull, followed by screeches of twisting alloy as lines wrapped around a cutter's propulsors. Lights flickered across the heads-up display, red markers flashing where impacts tore hull plating. One alien vessel bucked violently, nose pitching downward, cables digging deeper into its frame. Target bound, Karst called, voice cracking with adrenaline. Second net missed. Drone interference. On the aft monitor, alien drones zipped like streaks of shadow, their thrusters boiling trails through the black. One slammed into a cable line, snapping it with a flash. Another struck the side of Thomas's sub, sending the crew tumbling sideways. Metal groaned, sparks burst from a junction box, filling the cabin with biting fumes of scorched plastic. Seal that line, Thomas roared, hauling himself upright. Stabilize or we're dead weight. Miro, patched in from another sub, broke through the channel. We've lost 2 men. Pressure breach on compartment 3. Still fighting. His breath rasped, strained. 1 rig secured, though. Half disabled, but intact enough for analysis. Thomas gritted his teeth. Good. Drag it home. Don't let go no matter what. Through the forward viewport, luminescent plankton swirled around the bound cutter, caught in the violent dance of cables. Alien crew inside fired desperate countermeasures, jets of boiling fluid clouding sensors, sonar pulses battering the subs. Thomas's teeth rattled as the sound waves hammered the hull, a brutal physical throb shaking bones and chest. Boarding drones incoming, Karst shouted. Tiny forms appeared on sonar, drifting toward the sub like parasites. Each carried cutters designed to puncture hulls. Deploy shock grid, Thomas ordered. Sparks arced across the sub's outer skin. Drones convulsed as they made contact, their lights sputtering before they sank into darkness. But one latched onto the stern before frying, leaving a scar carved deep into plating. In the command chair, Thomas felt the sweat on his palms freezing against cold steel armrests. He stared at the display. 1 rig captured, 1 still tearing nodules from Earth's floor, another drifting free. He had no illusions. Victory here wasn't measured by glory but by survival with proof of their enemy's theft. Karst leaned close, voice hoarse. We can't hold long. Pressure's crippling the starboard tanks. Then we bleed with them, Tomas muttered. Latch the second net. Even if we sink with it, they'll know this ocean isn't theirs. The sub lurched violently as the second cable torpedo struck true, binding the second rig. Both machines bucked and twisted, claws frozen mid-dig. Tomas's crew cheered raggedly, voices raw, the sound part relief, part defiance. Over comms, Ivo Rask's calm tone broke in, a lifeline against the chaos. Tomas, every meter you drag up is proof. Hold them together. We'll take what you can bring. I hope your labs can make sense of the blood we're spilling, Tomas answered, chest heaving. Because my men are giving theirs. Alien escorts regrouped, bearing down with cutting beams that sliced through the water like streaks of fire. One swept across Thomas's flank, blistering the hull, filling the cabin with the stench of seared insulation. Alarms shrieked. Lights died before emergency strips flickered back. Karst slammed controls. We're losing buoyancy. Ballast dump now, Thomas shouted. Valves released with a violent hiss, flooding water out, jerking the sub upward. Men slammed into harnesses, ribs bruising against straps. Outside, the bound rig dragged behind them like a wounded beast, cables straining under the pull. Another sub drew alongside, battered but steady, floodlights piercing the murk. Its commander's voice crackled. We'll take the load. You climb. Thomas shook his head. Negative. We hold together. Shared weight or nothing. For long minutes, the battle became a grim tug of war. Subs hauling, cables snapping, alien drones swarming, only to be electrocuted. Bodies lost in silence no one could honor. At last, as dawn broke above the surface, Tomas's battered fleet emerged with two crippled rigs chained in tow. On the deck of the recovery ship, men staggered from hatches, soaked to the bone, faces gray with exhaustion. One fell to his knees, retching seawater and bile. Another stared blankly at the horizon, lips trembling but silent. Tomas climbed out last, boots thudding against steel, jacket soaked, eyes burning with salt and smoke. He handed a blood-stained data pad to the waiting courier. Ledger logs are inside. Give them to Ivo. Make it count. The captured rigs loomed against the sunrise, jagged silhouettes dripping with seawater, cables binding them like trophies from a hunt. Crew gathered on the deck, silent, their breaths steaming in the cold. Not a cheer, not a word, only the heavy knowledge that proof had been earned in blood and brine. Far above, Rethmar received the report. His claws twitched against the console as he studied losses displayed in pulsing lines across the laser plasma screen. The escorts gone, rigs stolen, logs compromised. For the first time, he felt unease crawl across his chest. Hunger was a weapon, yes, but now the humans had stolen a fragment of its blade. Don't breathe near the sample, Ivo Rask warned, voice low, eyes locked on the small glass vial balanced inside the containment cradle. His fingers tightened around the pipette as he released a single drop into the chamber. The fluid spread across the surface, a faint shimmer curling like frost over steel. Around the table, men leaned closer, their shadows stretching long across the lab's cold tiles. A hiss of coolant pipes filled the silence, carrying the chill of recycled air across the room. Neil Oric rubbed his raw hands together, his jaw clenched as though his teeth alone held the walls up. We've run these trials 6 times. Each failure burned hours we can't spare. Tell me why this one is different. Ivo didn't glance up. His voice was calm, but its edge cut sharper than the glassware between them. Because this batch was refined under reactor pressure we mimicked from the rigs Tomas dragged in. Their fermenters operate under thresholds ours don't need. That difference is the blade they never expected us to sharpen. Han stepped closer, adjusting his spectacles with fingers smudged by ink from scribbled notes. His gaze was heavy, tired. You're gambling with survival. If the isotope fails both systems, we doom ourselves first. Ivo lifted his head, staring straight at him. I've eaten bread that tasted like chalk for a week. I've watched boys in wards swallow air because food couldn't reach them in time. You think I don't know the risk? The greater risk is letting them mine every nodule we still hold. The vial's reaction began. Lines crept across the steel plate, fine cracks etched by stress fractures invisible to the naked eye, yet captured by the monitor above. One of the technicians gasped as the structure warped, then slumped. The Cathari fermenter alloy had failed. But in the second chamber, the human-modified tank continued steady, the culture inside bubbling with quiet, stubborn life. Niall slapped the bench, a short burst of sound that startled even him. It worked. By God, it worked, he laughed once, breathless and raw, then clamped his mouth shut as though ashamed of the sound. Ivo didn't laugh. He leaned back, pulling his gloves off finger by finger. It's not victory, it's leverage. Without an antidote, it becomes a massacre. That is not the war we're fighting, Jordan Slate entered, carrying the salt of outside air on his coat and the dirt of streets in his boots. His eyes scanned the bubbling tank, then cut to Ivo. Mars ledgers prove their depots run leaner than they admit. 2 cycles, maybe less, before this trick collapses them. If we go public, they'll deny everything. We need evidence even their workers can't ignore. Ivo nodded slowly. Then we release proof, not threats. Broadcast logs, cross-linked to their own ledgers, authenticated beyond doubt. Every father on their colonies must see it before their commanders bury it. The lab's silence thickened, broken only by the hum of fans drawing heat from the tanks. Each man wrestled with the weight of what they had created, a weapon forged not of steel or fire, but of hunger reversed. Niall's voice cracked, softer this time. You speak of antidote, of mercy, but if their soldiers starve while their young scream, won't they lash harder? Won't they turn their fury on us? Ivo looked at him, his gaze steady, unyielding. If they lash harder, it proves their cruelty to their own people. We cannot win a war of force. We can only win a war of evidence. Hunger will expose them in ways words never could. Later that night, Ivo stood outside the lab, the air raw with winter frost. He pulled his coat tight as sleet rattled on the roof. Lights from nearby districts flickered in uneven rhythm, power cuts rolling through the neighborhoods. Men stumbled through ration queues with sacks of coal, their breath white clouds rising into the night. A siren in the distance wailed as a fight broke at a depot gate. Bram Cole's voice came over the secure line, deep and gravelly. Ivo, Sablegate's defenses are massing. If you're going to use this switch, do it before they reinforce the blockade. Ivo exhaled, frost clinging to his lips. We'll move. But remember, Admiral, this isn't an attack. It's a negotiation with teeth. Cole chuckled grimly. Negotiation backed by famine still looks like war from where I sit. Then sit steady, Ivo replied. We're about to drag them into the same hunger they chained us with. He clicked off, staring across the city. Church bells tolled somewhere in the dark. From the ward below, faint through cracked windows, he could hear children coughing in their sleep. He closed his eyes, let the sound pierce him, and whispered to himself, "This ends with them asking us for bread." The next morning, the lab team assembled once more. The tanks gleamed under harsh light, their surfaces alive with bubbling cultures that smelled faintly of vinegar and yeast. Ivo raised his hand over the sample logs. Seal it. Lock the variant in triple containment, then prepare the antidote formula. If anyone doubts our intent, we show both together, the blade and the bandage. Each man moved without hesitation, tools clinking, seals clicking, data pads recording every step. They weren't soldiers, but they had become fighters nonetheless, armed with barrels of slurry and vials of altered catalysts. Outside, the city groaned under shortages, but in that tunnel, beneath layers of concrete and fear, humanity had built its first true counterstrike. Cut their corridor now, Admiral Bram Cole thundered across the command deck, his voice vibrating with urgency as his officers bent over their stations. The laser plasma displays above them spilled light across sweating faces, each panel alive with shifting vectors of enemy vessels, tightening around Sablegate. Alarms pulsed through the air, a pounding rhythm that seemed to squeeze lungs and rattle teeth. Cole's knuckles whitened as he leaned over the rail, eyes narrowing on the projection of the blockade. If we don't fracture their wall, no convoy reaches Earth again. The skimmer fleet answered with fire. Missiles streaked from launch tubes, their trails briefly glowing against the starless dark before striking the alien formation. Explosions blossomed in silence, expanding in bursts of fractured light that shimmered across the glass canopy. 2 Cathari escorts twisted in disarray, hulls breaking under the assault. But the others closed ranks swiftly, tightening their defensive arc around the depot. In the operations bunker beneath Geneva, Ivo Ras stood in front of a console where broadcast teams huddled over instruments. Sweat streaked down his temple, despite the cold air circulating through vents. He stared at the ledger files glowing across the heads-up display. Every intercepted shipment delay, every ration cut, every pediatric decline measured against dates and coordinates. He turned to Joran Slate. Push the broadcast through neutral satellites. No filters. Show their colonies everything. Joran's hands flew across the keys, his jaw locked. Transmitting now. Their families will see the shortages hitting their own kitchens. If this doesn't crack their commanders, nothing will. The feeds surged into alien systems. Across distant worlds, screens flickered to life in cramped apartments, in mess halls and schoolrooms. Graphs of falling food output, photographs of withered human children, and cross-referenced Cathari ration allocations scrolled side by side. And then came Reth Mar's voice, spliced from interrogations. His own admission that targeting the youngest accelerated societal collapse. The words spread faster than official censors could react. On the depot's command bridge, Cathari officers erupted in confusion as alerts piled onto their consoles. Subordinates whispered of protests on their colonies, of workers demanding fairness. One officer hissed, "They've turned our own records against us." Back in orbit, Cole's flagship rocked as beams tore across its flank, shaking men in their harnesses. Sparks showered from a ruptured panel. The scent of burning insulation filled the cabin. Cole steadied himself with a growl. "Hold the line. Skimmers, Alpha, and Delta, ram their picket if you have to. We need a breach." His throat burned as he barked the words, but no hesitation crossed his face. Through the forward viewport, the depot loomed, a massive structure anchored with tether lines glinting like silver threads. Convoys of alien haulers clustered around it, desperately pulling supplies inward. Cole pointed at them. "That depot is their artery. If we cut it, their empire bleeds." Meanwhile, in the Geneva bunker, Neil Oryx slammed his palm against the bench. "Look at the colony responses." On the displays, chatter rolled in from intercepted transmissions. Alien workers refusing to load transports, technicians locking reactor doors until antidote assurances were made. Evo's lips pressed thin. "It's spreading. They can't bury this. Now release the cure formula alongside the proof. Show them we hold the antidote too." Ha'an frowned deeply, voice heavy. "Won't that signal weakness? They'll know we're not trying to destroy them completely." "That's the point," Evo snapped. His eyes burned with fury, but his words carried weight measured by sleepless nights. "We're not executioners. We're the ones offering a way out." At Sablegate, Cole's skimmers crashed through the blockade at brutal cost. One vessel spun apart, debris scattering like ash. Another rammed a Cathari escort broadside, flames boiling across its hull before both drifted lifeless. Cole clenched the rail, grief flashing across his face for men he had trained and lost. But he drove forward. His flagship broke the perimeter, racing toward the depot's tether lines. A voice rang through the cabin, his tactical officer, voice hoarse with strain. "We're in a range of the docking. Spines boarding teams ready." "Send them," Cole ordered, steel in every syllable. "Take their yeast vaults intact." Shuttles blasted free, slamming onto the depot's hull. Breach charges carved smoking circles through alloy, and human soldiers stormed inside. Rifles braced, hearts pounding with fear and rage. Corridor firefights erupted, screams, ricochets, bodies falling against bulkheads. The sharp sting of propellant mixed with the copper tang of spilled blood. In the bunker, reports streamed in. Joran called out, "Depot crews are mutinying." They're bypassing officers, sending requests directly to us for antidote release. "It's unraveling from inside," Evo exhaled, shoulders sagging but eyes unblinking. "Then we've done it. Their weapon now chokes them, and their own hands reach for ours." He turned toward the monitors, watching alien civilians chant in streets thousands of light years away, holding empty bowls up as proof of betrayal. Cole's final command rang across the fleet channel, hoarse but resolute. "Depot secured. Vaults intact. Tethers cut. They're broken." Silence followed for a moment, heavy with loss, filled with the images of ships burning and men drifting. Then slowly, relief rose in the voices of officers who had lived through the storm. Back in Geneva, Evo pressed a hand flat to the cold steel of the bunker wall. He closed his eyes, hearing again the coughs of children in the wards, remembering the hollow stares of fathers clutching ration slips. For the first time in weeks, the knot in his chest loosened. Hunger had been turned back against its makers, and the clock no longer ticked only for Earth. "Radiation surge incoming," Niall Oryx shouted, his voice carrying a jagged edge of alarm across the fermenter tunnels. Gauges flared red, pipes rattled violently, and a wave of heat burst through the chamber like a furnace blast. Men stumbled back, shielding their faces with their sleeves as alarms shrieked from rusted wall panels. Ivo Rask planted his palms on the steel railing above the main vat, eyes locked on the boiling surface. The Cathari had unleashed their last countermeasure. Directed radiation pulses broadcast through the ionosphere, calculated to sterilize the engineered strains that Hearthfire depended on. For a moment, despair pressed like a weight in his chest. If the cultures failed, months of sacrifice would rot in minutes. "Check the rotations," he commanded, forcing his voice steady. His throat burned with the acrid taste of recycled air. "Verify the backups now." Miro scrambled to the terminal, fingers flying across keys. Numbers cascaded across the heads-up display, sweat dripping down his face. He gasped, then grinned despite the chaos. The decoy strains are collapsing, but the cores are holding. The library survived. Radiation shielded the vault lines. Relief shuddered through the men, shoulders dropping, breaths rushing out in ragged bursts. Ivo closed his eyes briefly, then straightened, his jaw tightening. "Then we keep feeding. Double the distribution to clinics tonight. If they thought they could starve us by burning the air itself, they'll learn otherwise." Above Earth, Bram Cole's skimmers clung to the fractured depot like barnacles on a dying beast. Boarding teams pushed deeper, securing corridors still heavy with smoke. Firefights crackled inside narrow halls where scorched panels littered the floor. Soldiers moved with grim determination, boots crunching on broken glass, ears ringing from exchanges of gunfire. At last, they burst into the vault chamber. Rows of shimmering tanks lined the walls, filled with the mother cultures that fueled Cathari fermenters across their empire. The air carried a sharp tang of disinfectant mixed with the faint sweetness of brewing yeast. Cole himself stepped forward, visor reflecting the pale glow. His voice carried through the comm. "Confirm integrity. If these stores fall into vacuum, we lose the lever we bled for." A sergeant scanned quickly, running gloved hands over seals and gauges. "Intact, Admiral." "They're scared, not reckless. These are their lifeline," Cole allowed himself one shallow nod. "Then humanity now holds the key to their meals." Meanwhile, in alien colonies light years away, unrest surged like wildfire. The laser plasma displays in public squares now showed intercepted broadcasts. Human children, skeletal in wards, alien ledgers exposing stolen rations, testimonies from captured officers. Workers slammed tools to the ground, refusing to load transports. Shouts echoed through streets. Cathari commanders barked orders, but their subordinates hesitated, torn between duty and hunger clawing at their own families. In Geneva, Joran Slate leaned over the console, headset pressed to his ear. "Reports confirm colony mutinies. Workers are demanding equal shares and access to the human antidote. They're bypassing their commanders entirely." Haan adjusted his glasses, eyes heavy with exhaustion. "They'll fracture from within before long, but the danger remains. Hardliners won't surrender control quietly." Ivo folded his arms, face carved with fatigue, yet lit by grim resolve. Hardliners or not, the equation has changed. Their children cry louder than their commanders shout. That sound spreads faster than fear. A courier burst into the chamber, uniform scorched, voice raw. "Message from Cole, Sable Gate secured, vaults under human guard. Casualties heavy, but the artery is ours." He placed a blood-stained slate on the bench. "Admiral says, we cut their tethers." The words hung in the air, striking every man differently. Some closed their eyes, grief shadowing the edges of relief. Others exhaled shaky laughter, unable to hold back the tide of release. Ivo touched the slate with one hand, silent for a long breath. Then he spoke softly, words carrying weight instead of volume. "We've taken from them the same choice they forced upon us. Either they share, or they starve." Niall slumped against the railing, voice hoarse. We've bought the future with the blood of men who'll never see it. Evo's gaze cut to him, unflinching. Then it's our duty to make that future worth their loss. That night, distribution centers across Earth came alive. Stadiums once built for games now thundered with the roar of machinery as hearthfire vats pumped thick nutrient bread into massive ovens. The scent of baking yeast drifted across frozen fields, a smell that pulled fathers and sons into lines stretching out of sight. Inside, steaming loaves were handed out, each portion stamped with a simple mark, two hands gripping a stalk of grain. Children devoured their first real meals in weeks, crumbs sticking to their lips as parents stood behind them, eyes wet, shoulders sagging in relief. At one center, Ivo walked among them quietly. He watched a boy tear his loaf in half, offering the larger piece to his younger brother without hesitation. The image burned into his chest, searing deeper than any battle report. He crouched, ruffling the boy's hair. "Eat it all. Tomorrow there will be more." The boy nodded, chewing quickly, face already brighter. For Ivo, it was proof stronger than any victory speech, that humanity had held the line long enough for life to return. Yet even amid relief, danger lingered. Inside the captured depot, Cathari commanders who refused to surrender plotted sabotage, whispering orders through hidden channels. Cole's men uncovered explosives wired to blow the yeast vaults. A firefight erupted in the lower decks, echoing with ricochets and screams. Cole himself waded into the clash, rifle braced, eyes blazing with fury. When the last rebel fell, silence returned, broken only by the hiss of extinguishers. The vaults stood intact, but the price was more blood spilled onto steel floors. Cole reported back, voice steady though his face was streaked with grime. "Sabotage attempt neutralized. Vaults safe." Their desperation grows. In Geneva, Ivo listened to the transmission, jaw set. Desperation is a blade that cuts both ways, and now they're bleeding on every edge. As dawn broke, Earth's cities stirred with a different sound. Not the despair of empty streets, but the chorus of children's voices rising in unison. Songs carried faintly from schools where hearthfire bread was served with steaming milk. For the first time in months, the sound of laughter pierced the cold morning air. Ivo stood outside the ward where it had all begun, frost crunching under his boots, breath fogging in the crisp light. He closed his eyes hearing those voices and whispered to himself, "Now they will come to us not as rulers, but as beggars." "Sit down, Rethmar," Ivo Rask ordered, his voice level but iron under every syllable. The captured logistics officer lowered himself into the chair, chains clinking, softly against the floor. Across the negotiation table in Geneva, the air was thick with the scent of burnt coffee and cold stone, the kind of smell that settled when sleepless nights turned into another dawn. The chamber was crowded, advisors, soldiers, exhausted clerks, all watching as the first formal parley between occupier and occupied began. Rethmar's eyes, sharp and weary, flicked over the stacks of binders and sealed drives on the table. "Your broadcast shattered discipline across our colonies," he rasped. "Do you understand what you've unleashed?" Ivo leaned forward, both palms pressing flat on the table's scarred wood. "Yes, we've unleashed truth, and truth was the one thing your command could never ration." His voice cut through the silence, and every man in the room felt its weight. Bram Cole entered, his uniform still scorched from the boarding actions at Sablegate. He dropped a sealed canister onto the table, its steel surface scarred by the fight that delivered it. "These are your yeast mothers," he said, his tone like gravel ground underfoot. "They're alive, intact, and under human guard. Without them, your empire eats itself. With them, your empire negotiates." Rethmar's throat worked as he swallowed. He looked from the canister to the men across the table, measuring their resolve. "If you cut our food chain entirely, our young die before yours recover. What separates you from us then?" "The difference," Ivo answered, voice steady, "is that we offer the antidote. You starved our children to break our will. We feed yours to break your cruelty." The officer stared at him, caught between pride and the gnawing awareness of collapse. Outside, faint chants rose from the streets. Families gathered in squares, some cheering, some grieving, all demanding a future better than the months of hunger they had endured. Jorn Slate leaned in from the side, his tone sharp. "We don't care about your council's decrees. We care about guarantees, ration parity across colonies, inspections on every depot. Violation once, and the switch goes live again." Niall Oric, exhausted yet unyielding, added quietly, "And this time, there will be no delay. You know now we can reach into your reactors. That leverage remains unless you bind yourselves to restraint." The silence stretched long, broken only by the scraping of Rethmar's chains against the chair. Finally, he bowed his head, not in reverence, but in recognition of inevitability. "The council will yield," he admitted, voice hoarse. "Without bread, they have no soldiers left to command." Relief did not come as cheers. It came as a long, shared exhale. The men at the table knew the war was not won by glory, but by mathematics, by hunger twisted back on its masters. Days later, the treaty signing unfolded under guarded light. Alien envoys filed into the chamber, gaunt and subdued, their uniforms hanging loose on frames hollowed by shortages. They signed agreements that banned embargoes against children, ceded oversight of depots, and guaranteed Earth's independence from occupation. Cameras flashed. Interpreters muttered translations. The sound of pens scratching against parchment was louder than any anthem. Outside the chamber, crowds pressed against barriers. Fathers lifted sons onto shoulders, showing them loaves of hearthfire bread as symbols of defiance turned to triumph. The air smelled of yeast, smoke, and sweat, all mixing into something that felt like renewal. Soldiers passed through the crowd not as conquerors but as men returning home, eyes ringed with fatigue, uniforms stained by battles fought in shadow. On the floor of one ward, Ivo visited the same boy whose lips had once cracked from starvation. The child now tore into a steaming roll, crumbs dusting his chin, laughter bubbling up as his father looked on with tears streaming unchecked. Ivo crouched, the noise of the ward fading into that moment. "You'll never starve again," he said softly, though it was as much a vow to himself as to the boy. Back at Sable Gate, Admiral Cole oversaw the dismantling of alien tether lines. The depot, once a fortress of control, now stood under joint watch. Men walked its corridors with rifles lowered, their boots crunching over debris of a war fought without glory, but with consequence. Cole's second-in-command asked quietly, "What will they call this in the years to come?" Cole stared out at the anchored haulers, their bays empty, their crews silent. "They'll call it the day hunger became a weapon too heavy to wield, and the day they learned we could carry it longer than they could." The ripple spread farther still. Across alien colonies, protests turned to reforms. Families demanded equal rations, technicians refused sabotage orders, and commanders who clung to old policies found themselves isolated. A single truth carved itself into the marrow of their society. The humans they sought to weaken had instead rewritten the rules of survival. In Geneva, Ivo addressed his weary team one final time. His voice, though quiet, carried the weight of months lived on a knife's edge. "This chapter closes here, but its echo will not fade. They came to us as rulers and left as petitioners. They starved our children, and now their species kneels for food. Let no one forget what that means." The men around him bowed their heads, not in pride, but in remembrance of those who had not lived to see the reversal. They carried that burden as much as any victory, and so the war ended not with Earth's fleets blazing across the stars, but with bread baked in underground tunnels, with data exposed to colonies who could no longer look away, with a poisoned weapon turned back on its wielder. Humanity had survived by turning hunger into a mirror, and when the occupiers looked into it, they saw their own weakness staring back. Ivo walked out into the square as evening settled. Fires burned in barrels, children played under banners stitched from scraps, and the sound of laughter mixed with the rumble of voices telling stories of defiance. He stopped, closed his eyes, and breathed deeply. For the first time in memory, the air smelled of food carried openly through streets instead of desperation locked in warehouses. The empire that had starved Earth's children now bent its head, begging for the bread of those it once sought to break. The ledger was balanced, not by vengeance, but by endurance and proof. Humanity had claimed its place in history, not through conquest, but by teaching an empire that even the smallest mouth, once silenced, could force the mightiest to bow. If this story shook you to the core, hit that subscribe button right now for more cinematic HFY sagas where humanity turns the tables on empires that thought they held the upper hand. Now we want to hear from you. If you had the power to flip a single weapon back against its wielder, what would you choose and why? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where every fight proves humanity is never outmatched, only underestimated. See you in the next story. Your